Hey, what is going on everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and here I'm going to be showing you all something hopefully simple but pretty fun. I'm going to be showing you all with the GBxCart RW how you can back up your Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance cartridges, and more importantly, also back up these saves on them as well too. Now there's different ways that you can do this, there's different devices out there. A while ago I ended up purchasing the GBxCart RW. I specifically have the 1.4 Pro revision, and I went with this because it seemed like a pretty nifty, pretty great open source solution, and it's quite affordable. You can pick it up from different sellers, different places. I'm going to have some links down below in the description. I had personally picked up on eBay at one point. However, the official site here, as you can see, it does show it has a nice user interface that you're able to, easily navigate here, which we're just going to do the basics, which is just going to be backups on here. Of course, you'll be able to back up your game saves, so if you want to just keep them safe and or use them on another cartridge or even an emulator, you can do that. However, it also says here that you can even rewrite your own flashcards. I'm not going to be covering that in particular. However, it does state whether it's a high quality reproduction flash cart, a clone bootleg cart, or a DIY cart, we support the majority of them. So you're able to, for example, put homebrew on those cartridges if you so wish to. Again, I'm not going to be showing the writing portion on here, but it should be easy enough to figure out if you follow along and you're able to back up your games easily. Either way, we are going to need a few things for this. Of course, we are going to need the GBxCart RW device itself, and we're going to need our games. Again, this is going to cover Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance cartridges, and I'm going to show you how to do it on all of them there. You're also going to need a computer to actually run the software, and we're going to be connecting up our device through USB Type-C. So with all that in mind, let's go ahead and get the interface and everything set up on our computer. So I do have the device on hand here, quite literally in my hand as I am recording this, and you can come over to the GBxCart RW site, which will be linked down below in the description of this video. Scroll down here and you'll be able to find the downloads section, and there is also a driver that we're going to need if you're doing this on Windows. I'm going to only be covering this for Windows, however this does work on Linux and Mac as well too, if you want to use the software for that. However, I'm going to click on Flash GBX for Windows. And once we come here, it's going to bring us to the latest release of Flash GBX over at GitHub, and you can download either the portable or the install setup. I'm going to personally go with the portable version, so go ahead and click on whichever zip you want, and then save it somewhere you can easily find it. I've saved mine out to the desktop, and what you can do here once you get your zip file is right click this and you can extract it into its own folder. With that extracted, I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of the zip, so we just have the extracted version right here, and as you can see it looks a little something like this. To get started, just go ahead and double click the Flash GBX executable. It's going to bring up this command prompt window, to which it will ask you if you want to download and install the Flash GBX GUI prerequisites. You want to hit Y on your keyboard and then tap enter, and just let it do its thing. It's going to go ahead, download, and run a few prerequisites here. Now, I've already run this on my computer before, so it's not going to take as long to set up, but it might take a little longer on your end. Once all the prerequisite setup has been completed, we do want to keep this running at all times. So whenever you're running Flash GBX, just go ahead and keep the command prompt window running in the background, but you're going to get a pop-up here saying, "Welcome to Flash GBX by Lesser Kuma. Would you like to automatically check for new versions at application startup?" And for this, I'm going to say yes. You can choose if you want to or not. You also might get a notification here saying no compatible devices found, and that's okay. We can just hit OK on this. Now this here is the software we're going to use, which is Flash GBX. It should be all set up now, but now let's go ahead and try to connect the GBxCart to our computer. Again, we're going to be using USB Type-C for this, so just take a USB Type-C cable and plug it into the USB Type-C port on your GBxCart. You should see some LEDs light up, and then all should be well. Once it's physically connected here, we can click on connect, and it should be able to find it right here. As you can see, it was able to find the device, and it was able to find everything over on the right here, but we're not paying too much attention to this, we just really care about the GUI itself. However, if you are having issues with this getting installed and set up on here, you might need to install the drivers manually for this device. Mine was able to set up automatically here every time. However, if you need to do this manually, you can come over to the main website, scroll down, and click on the downloads for the CH340, CH341 driver. If you need to do the driver install, I would recommend closing out of Flash GBX, and then find the zip file here, right click this, and extract it out. We're just going to extract it here, and we do have a new folder that is CH340 driver. Inside of here, you should have an executable as well as a folder, but we can just run the executable right here. However, if you have to do this, make sure you physically disconnect your GBxCart from your computer and then run through the installer. If you get a prompt here, go ahead and say yes. Once we're at this point, we can select this INF, click on install, and let it install. However, I don't need to do this here because I do know mine detects just fine. However, if you go through this install process, once successful, I would recommend restart your computer and then continue where you left off. Either way, getting the device set up here, let's go ahead and open up Flash GBX yet again. Now from here, I'd recommend plug in your GBxCart, click on connect, wait for a bit, and it should hopefully find it. However, for anybody who is on an outdated version of this, or just in case there is a new firmware that comes out, or really just to ensure we're on the latest firmware here, well, let's go ahead and update the firmware. For this, you can click on Tools, go to Firmware Updater, and here you're going to get a few options. As you can see, this is the current firmware that my board is running, and this is the latest firmware which is available. So mine is already flashed to the latest firmware, but just for this tutorial, I am going to reflash it. You will need to check which PCB version you have, so you have to physically look at the PCB. Mine is a 1.4 Pro, but since it only says 1.4, not 1.4a, I'm going to select 1.4. That is important. Make sure you select the proper PCB version. Once that's all selected, you can click on Install Firmware Update. And we're now going to follow this process here. At this point, you now need to disconnect the USB cable from your GBxCart. You should then locate the small button on the GBxCart itself, hold it down, and then plug the GBxCart back into your computer. Wait for 2 seconds and then unplug it. You should see that the LED for done should be lit up, and that should be the only one. And if that is accurate, go ahead, safely put your GBxCart down somewhere and click on OK. At this point now, it's going to begin updating the firmware on your device. Do not mess with your device, do not disconnect it, do not move anything, just wait a minute or two for this to complete. During this process, the LED is probably going to be flashing as well. Again, that's just part of the firmware process. Do not worry about it, just don't let this process be interrupted. And once it is complete, your GBxCart should be ready to use, and you should get a notification here saying the firmware update is complete, so click on OK, and that should be all good. Just to be safe, you can disconnect this and reconnect it, and you should be on the latest firmware. So now with all the groundwork laid out, we are ready to start dumping our games, which is the whole point of doing this here. Before we start plugging in our cartridges though, we need to make sure that they're clean. So thankfully this process is pretty simple. If you don't know how to clean up game cartridges here, there's really only 2 things you're going to need, and this is what I will recommend. 99% isopropyl alcohol if you can find it, if not, at least 90% isopropyl alcohol, and Q-tips. What I would recommend here is really only use 1 Q-tip end per cartridge, so each Q-tip would be good for 2 cartridges in my opinion. But what you should do here is take an end of your Q-tip, saturate it pretty well with isopropyl alcohol, and then clean the PCB itself really well. You don't have to open it up, thankfully, you just need to clean the contacts themselves and clean them super well. Once each cartridge you want to dump has been cleaned, I do recommend keeping them over on the side for about 10 or 15 minutes before you connect them up to the GBA cart, and once they are all nice and clean, we can go ahead and get them connected. To do that here, it's pretty simple. You're going to quite literally connect the cartridge to your GBxCart like it is a console. So what you want to do is connect it up once it has been cleaned, make sure it has a firm connection, and then go back over to Flash GBX. To make sure everything is good here, make sure your GBxCart shows as connected, and then if you're doing a Game Boy or Game Boy Color ROM, you're going to want to select Game Boy for the mode itself. As you can see, it populated a lot of the information here automatically. So I've popped in Pokemon Yellow because I want to work on a Game Boy game first. So for this, if we want to back up the ROM, we quite literally click on Backup ROM. The nice thing is it also automatically names your game and all this fun stuff here. So I've created a new folder called GB Backups, and I'm going to call this here GB, just like that. And this is exactly what I am dumping here, Pokemon Yellow version. Just save the ROM file itself, and thankfully since these are ROMs, they don't take too long to dump here, so just give it a few seconds to finish dumping. Once that's all good, you can click on OK. And at this point, if you also want to back up save data, you can do that as well by clicking on Backup Save Data. For a lot of these games, especially the ones with battery backups on here, this is going to be pretty important. So to do this, let's click on Backup Save Data, and I would just recommend save this next to your ROM itself. It's going to be in a .sav file. Click on Save, and there you go, you're done. So now with this completed, to switch over to a Game Boy Color cartridge, it's going to be the same process, but for here, let's go ahead and click on Disconnect. So we're going to disconnect power to the device itself. We're then going to unplug the Game Boy cartridge, plug in a Game Boy Color cartridge, and now click on Connect yet again. It should supply power to the device. Select Game Boy for a Game Boy Color ROM, and as you can see here, everything ends up showing. So this is the exact game I'm going to be backing up. For this, easy enough, we're going to click on Backup ROM, and I'm going to save it out to my GBC folder. Just like this, that's exactly what I need. So click on Save, and this one is a little bit bigger, but within a few seconds here, it should be complete. And as you can see, this is all done. So we can click on OK, and if we want to back up the save, we can click on Backup Save Data, and just save this exact same thing. It's going to save again as a .sav file, save it out, and you're done. So with that, you probably guess what we're going to be doing now, but we're going to do the exact same thing with a Game Boy Advance game. So for this, click on Disconnect yet again. You can now disconnect your Game Boy Color cartridge, connect up your Game Boy Advance cartridge, and over on the software, click on Connect. It should bring this up here, and now click on Game Boy Advance if that's what you're using. And as you can see, Max Payne is showing up, so that is all good. We can do the exact same thing here, so click on Backup ROM, save it out wherever you want to save a Game Boy Advance game, click on Save, and give this a few moments. These games are going to be a lot bigger here, so give it some more time, but thankfully it still doesn't take all too long. So just like before, we were able to back up the ROM, and it was checksummed successfully. Click on OK, and if you want to back up the save data, exact same thing. Click on Backup Save Data, save it next to your ROM preferably, click on Save, and as you can see, that's all there is to it. So the cool thing is here, you're able to back up your saves themselves, which is why I was also covering this, but in case you ever want to rewrite your saves, you can always come over to Write Save Data, and you can either restore from a save file, which is where we would grab this save file for example for the accompanying game. So if you want to back up your own save, or maybe you have a save that you've downloaded somewhere, or maybe you're playing through this game on an emulator and you want to put your save on the actual cartridge itself, you're able to get that .sav file and you can put it on the physical cartridge, which is awesome. You could also just erase the cartridge save data, or if you want to test saving on here, you can run a stress test against the cartridge itself. So really awesome here overall. Finally, I do want to cover one last type of game. I'm going to click on Disconnect here, and I'm actually going to plug in a game that is not a retail release, so it's not going to be in the database, but I'm plugging in the Kudzu demo that I have here, which is a homebrew title. So I've just connected it. I'm going to click on Connect, go to Game Boy, and you can see right here, it's going to look a little something like this. Now you're going to see there's not a game in the database, and I will say if this is something like a homebrew, it's not going to be in the database itself. If it is a retail game, you might have a version of the game that hasn't been documented, or you might want to just double check and clean your cartridge and make sure everything is all good. However, if you're going to back up something that is not in the database itself, that is totally fine. Just do the same thing here, click on Backup ROM, and we can save it out here. Since this is a Game Boy game, there we go, click on Save, and we are dumping this. So that's about all there is to this here overall. We were able to back that up, and just to back up the save itself, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Click on that, and there we go, we have everything. Let's go ahead, disconnect, and now that I'm done dumping my games for now, I'm going to close out a Flash GBX. So let's go ahead and look at our backups. Over here, I have the Game Boy ROMs and the saves. I have my Game Boy Advance, ROM, and save, and the exact same thing here for the Game Boy Color. So this is great. At this point here, you know that these dumps are yours. You were able to dump them from your own cartridges, and most importantly, which I think this is what people are going to care about the most, these are your own saves. So especially if this is a save that you really care about, and or maybe it's just a really old childhood save that has something that you care about on there, you have it dumped out. So the nice thing is you can take these ROMs themselves, you can play them on emulators if you want to. I personally really like making VC injects so I can play them on my 2DS XL. However, you now also have the .save files as well, so you are able to bring those along into emulators or just have them backed up, or in case you are worried about something, like for example Pokemon will be a big one. Let's say you do need to do a battery swap on here, I would recommend you run GBxCart to back up the ROM, back up the save itself, and then that way when you go to replace the battery, you can just restore the save back over using GBxCart, and you don't have to worry about that for a while since you have a nice fresh battery in there. Anyways, that is about it for this video here. I hope this was something simple and easy enough for you to follow along with, and I hope you did enjoy it. If you did, a like would absolutely be appreciated. If you didn't, a dislike is fine as well too. But either way, this is Mr. Mario signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone.